Okay.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Hal Shurtleff. I am the New England coordinator for the John Birch Society. And we are here in beautiful Vermont, the state capital, in late February of 2014. And we're here to visit legislators about a very potentially dangerous thing called the Article 5 Convention, or sometimes referred to as a con-con. And my colleague, Dan McGonigle, will be up here soon, and I have been visiting state capitals in the region, working with local members and others, organizations that are opposing this. And before I get into it, I want to actually read Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution, so you have a good idea of what we're talking about here. The Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution, or on the application of the legislators of 2/3 of the several states, shall call a convention for proposing amendments, which in either case shall be valid to all intents and purposes as part of this Constitution, when ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the several states, or by conventions in 3/4 thereof, as the one or the other mode of ratification may be proposed by the Congress, provided that no amendment which may be made prior to the year 1808 shall in any manner affect the first and fourth clauses in the 9th section of the first article, and that no state without its consent shall be deprived of its equal suffrage in the Senate. And that Section 9 part dealt with the importation of slaves, and thankfully a law was passed to ban that as soon as it was possible to do that. And it was passed in 1807 and passed, and went into effect in 1808. So the two ways of amending the U.S. Constitution, the only way that we've ever used under the U.S. Constitution was the first way, 2/3 of the House and Senate, this would be the U.S. House and Senate, propose amendments. It goes to the states for ratification. In some cases, an amendment has a sunset clause in there. In some cases, they do not, and there's actually several amendments that are still out in constitutional cyberspace that have not been. And one of them goes back to, I think, many years, over 100 years. And one just was added, the 27th Amendment, dealing with pay raises. That was one of the early, in fact, one of the original amendments, and it just passed about 10 or so years ago. So some of these amendments are floating around there and have not been ratified yet, but are still there to be ratified. Yeah, the one that some people debate is the 13th Amendment, dealing with, there's a 13th Amendment, but there was another amendment that some people can pretend that has already passed. But that's still sort of floating around, dealing with titles of nobility and esquire, etc. So anyway, the second part that we're concerned about is where states, 2/3 of the states, in this case it would be 34 states, formally call for a convention. Now, in the Constitution itself, under Article 5, it says amendments, plural. It doesn't say single for one reason or another. And from 1789, when the Constitution became the law of the land, for the first 100 years or so, every application or resolution calling for a con-con simply called for an Article 5. But around the late part of the 1800s to the early part of the 1900s, there was a populist movement, and there was a call to have the direct election of U.S. senators. Prior to the 17th Amendment, senators were actually elected by the state assemblies. And there were something like 32 states that had a call for a convention for that amendment. Now, as we mentioned earlier, you can't limit it, but that was the motivation. That could have been an open convention as well. So Congress decided to pass the amendment and went to the states, and the states lost a big part of their influence, a good part of their checks and balances by approving that amendment. And then there have been numerous calls for a convention, over 600 since the beginning, since 1789. And by the mid-80s, early 80s to mid-80s, there were calls for a convention for the purpose of a balanced budget amendment. And again, I have to reiterate that you cannot limit the convention to any one thing or a number of things, and that's one of the biggest problems here. And even a balanced budget amendment, you have to look at that. What our nation needs is a constitutional budget. A balanced budget amendment would not necessarily limit our national debt or do anything about the national debt. In fact, of all the amendments, proposed amendments I've seen, almost every one of them has an escape clause. For example, 26 states can override that if they decide, or it's simply in the state of a national emergency. Then, so we declare a national emergency, and some folks say we've been in one for many, many years now. So I'm making that null and void. If folks who want a balanced budget amendment should be advocating a constitutional budget, that would be the real way to go. And, but not through Article 5. In the mid-'80s, there were a number of groups out there pushing for one, and one of them was committees on the Constitution. And there was a member of that group that wrote a book, The Power to Lead, James McGregor Burns. And in that book, he called for, he said that our founders were too wise for us. He said, we have to make right what they put asunder. And he advocated an Article 5 convention to do that. And thankfully, there were a lot of groups back then, as diverse as the ACLU, the VFW, the DAR, Daughters of the American Revolution, and other groups opposing this. And they passed resolutions at their conventions and so forth. And by the we were actually 2 states away. And then our organization got very much involved in rescinding not just calls for a balanced budget amendment through an Article 5, but all calls. Because there were numerous states that had these calls, and there were no sunset clauses on these resolutions. So we got roughly 13 states to rescind their calls. It was very difficult work because there was no media attention on this subject. Not many people really were aware of this. And our members and our friends and what have you would visit state legislators, and we managed to get 13 states to repeal. And then we saw every now in the early part of this 2000 first decade, we saw a few new amendments being, new proposals being submitted, but they were quickly shot down. In 2010, after 20 years of trying to get all of New Hampshire's calls rescinded, we were successful in having a Democrat House. But the bills, the resolutions were introduced by sort of the constitutional Republicans, and they voted overwhelmingly to repeal all of their old calls. But within a 2-year period, they got another call passed in 2012. Now, there is a group called the Goldwater Institute, and they've been very active. It was named after the late Barry Goldwater of Arizona. And if you go to their website and you believe in limited government, you probably agree with most of what they have to say. But they're also very big advocates of Article 5. And 2 years ago, they were trying to promote something called Compact for America. And their goal was to get the governors of all the states, or at least enough of them, I think they wanted 26, to go down to Dallas, July 4th. Now, if I'm trying to get governors to do something on my behalf, I wouldn't choose Dallas July 4th. It's a beautiful city, but not July 4th. I'll probably pick maybe Montpelier or Concord, New Hampshire, maybe Boston, but definitely not a place like that and that kind of that. But this didn't go anywhere. I think it was sort of confusing for a lot of people, and they even lost it in their home state of Arizona. It was shot down. 2011, in September of 2011, a very interesting event happened at Harvard University, Harvard Law School. A Constitutional Convention Forum was held, and they used the word Constitutional Convention. It was called, if you go to their website, con.org, you can see what went on there. There's some videos. It was promoted by Larry Lessig, Professor Lessig, who's a liberal man, a man of the left, and the co-supporter was Mark Meckler of the Party Patriots. I think he's no longer affiliated with them directly. And they had this 2-day forum. I tried to get credentialed. I tried to be there as a panelist for my organization, John Birch Society. For some reason, they didn't return our calls, even though in our emails, even though this was billed as a both sides would be heard. And there were a couple of views, a few people there opposing it. One of them was Professor Lawrence Tribe, a liberal law professor who is very good on this issue. He's correct on this issue, and he couldn't be denied. He's tenured there for years, and he's a colleague of Larry Lessig. And I think there was 1 or 2 others. And I understand that at that time, Mr. Meckler was sort of, well, I'm not sure about this, don't really know. Now he's totally committed to the point where if you dare oppose his point of view, you're evil or you're fringe. That's how, in some of his writings, if you go to their website, Convention of the States, you will see what they have to say. Now, so that took place in September 2011. Then we didn't really hear too much until Mark Meckler formed Convention of the States. And last summer, in the August of 2013, Mark Levin wrote his book, Liberty Amendments. Now, Mark Levin is a very popular, at least in some circles, talk show host. And he was advocating, proposed, I think, 11 amendments via the Article 5 Convention. And he was able to get some, what we refer to as neocon talk show hosts, Sean Hannity, Rush Limbaugh, and a few, Glenn Beck and a few others to sign on to this. And therefore, now you have lots of people out there that support these hosts that are supporting this. And very few of them knew anything about this issue, probably up until that book was published. And so right now, we have there's about, I don't know, 12 or 13 states where they have these resolutions pending. Resolutions calling for either a balanced budget amendment or what they think is a limited convention. On the other side of the ideological spectrum, we have folks like Move to Amend, and we have the Wolf Pack. Wolf Pack, by the way, the founder of the Wolf Pack was also present at this convention at Harvard. And he is funded by George Soros. And interestingly enough, some of the folks on the right pushing it are funded by the Koch brothers, like ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council. So, and one of the things that Wolfpack is pushing is an amendment to do away with the concept of personhood for corporations. Now, that issue, even if it's a viable issue, and I don't think it is, because you have to see an amendment that goes after a big, mean corporation can go after a small PAC as well, or a small organization that wants to inform its citizens on certain issues. So you got to be careful of what you're advocating. But that could be done, even if it is a viable thing and should be done. You don't need to have an amendment to remedy it. In fact, the Constitution gives the remedy to deal with the Supreme Court, and most people are unfamiliar with this. Article 3 of the U.S. Constitution says that Congress can limit the appellate jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. So what they have to do is they can get a law passed, or submit a law, or just say that Supreme Court has no jurisdiction on this particular issue. They've done that in the past with labor laws, for example. They also have a remedy that it's never been used, I think, with the Supreme Court. It's called impeachment. It's there. The Article 5 has never been used. And they say we should use that because they gave us a gift. Well, the gift of impeachment's there too, folks. So those would be two ways to rein in Supreme Court justices that aren't doing their job. So let me just mention, I've testified, and a number of us have testified at hearings around the region anyway, and I'm going to use some of their arguments. And some of these arguments you will see on their websites, like if you go to the Conference of States websites, frequently asked questions. One of the biggest reasons not to have one is very simple, that if we have a runaway government at the federal level, why would any new amendments make any difference? Why would they start obeying amendments if they're already ignoring a good part of the Constitution as it is? And they respond by saying that they're going to write these amendments in a way that can't be misconstrued. They said that the founders had, in their wildest dreams, would never thought that we would be where we are today. Well, there are some parts of the Constitution that are pretty clear-cut. That there's really no need for reinterpretation, but it's being done anyway, folks. So that wouldn't be the solution. They tell us that there's a safety net. 3/4 of the states would never do anything unreasonable, never pass an unreasonable amendment. Well, that term unreasonable is a subjective term, isn't it? When I was in New Hampshire testifying last month, in just January of 2014, a state rep that was sort of motivated by the Wolfpack. Wolfpack is a left-wing group. He used that argument. Well, what's reasonable to somebody from his worldview is unreasonable to somebody from my worldview. So what's reasonable for Mark Meckler and Convention of the States advocates would be unreasonable for people like Wolfpack. So that doesn't really hold any water. Also, states can do a lot of unreasonable things without any help from an Article 5 convention. Let me give you an example. They passed the income tax. Yeah, states said, go ahead and tax our citizens. We don't mind. State legislators, they passed that amendment. What about the 70, which I mentioned earlier? They said, take away some of our power. State legislators said, yeah, go right ahead, let's give it up. They did that. They passed the 18th Amendment that led to organized crime being created in this country. So they do a lot of crazy things sometimes. Also, Common Core, something that is a national standard that has been thrust upon states. In 2009, the Department of Education at the federal level said, you'll give your money, but you have to take this Common Core sight unseen. And guess what, folks? 46 states, I believe, took the money, and we'll read the bill later. We'll read it later. And now you have parents and organizations all over the country fighting Common Core. That, to me, was something that was very unreasonable. What about something called Agenda 21, a United Nations-based program that was launched in 1992? All 50 states, including Vermont, are implementing aspects of Agenda 21. And it was only 2 states that have actually outlawed aspects of Agenda 21. And that was recently. So states will do a lot of unreasonable things all the time. And we may have a runaway federal government, but we also have runaway state governments. And you see what's happening. We were in Connecticut yesterday. You see what's happening in Connecticut with the gun control issue. They're making criminals out of thousands of law-abiding citizens. And that's going to be coming to a state near you if we don't. So right now, there are about 20 states that have live calls. And our job is to create an informed, help educate the legislators about this, and also various organizations and individuals that we don't want an Article 5 convention, and we need to stop and work against it. Now, when we do have a convention, I ask these people, you want to have this convention, who will be the delegates? Well, they have no idea. See, there are no laws outlining or guiding the convention. We've never had one under the U.S. Constitution. The original one was done under the Articles of Confederation, and Article 13 of that Articles of Confederation said that all states have to agree to any new amendments. So they went down, the delegates, most of them were honorable men, and presided by George Washington. You couldn't get any better than that. And they said, you know what, we're just going to write a new one. And we're very glad they did. And I understand that some states, maybe many states, gave their delegates the authority to do that. Well, sure they did. They're a sovereign body. The states created the federal government, not the other way around. So why can't, it's possible, and the people use the term runaway. I don't think it's going to be a runaway in the sense that there's going to be 1,000 crazy amendments and everyone they're going to pass is going to really be chaotic and we'll have a new country or a new constitution. I think we have planned runaway, put that in quotation marks. Now, I've seen some of these proposed amendments that will, and again, you don't have to have a brand new constitution to change this document, you just have to have several amendments. For example, in Hawaii, they passed a resolution in the House, I don't know if it's passed the Senate yet, that they're calling on Congress to, for an Article 5 convention to change, to do away with the Electoral College. That's a fundamental part of our Constitution. They want to have, they want to make Obamacare constitutional. Well, if you have to have an amendment to make it constitutional, it tells me it's not constitutional now, even though 5 out of 4 justices, I think they call it a tax. One justice said it was a tax, I guess. So they want to do away with the 2/3 of the Senate to ratify treaties to a simple majority, making it much easier to get into these international treaties that will zap away more of our freedoms and what have you. The Arms Trade Treaty, by the way, I think there was a little bit more than 50 that were against it, but in the next election cycle, you don't know what would happen. Now, some of the supporters of an Article 5 who are of the Republican mindset, hey, we have nothing to worry about. We have a majority of houses around the country are Republican held. Well, what does that mean? That means nothing at all to me. There's a lot of Republicans doing a lot of things just as bad as Democrats. So the notion that we're safe, but these resolutions have no sunset clause. So maybe there's 26 Republican majorities around the country. What about 2 years from now? Or 4 years from now? What will we have? And you remember, you look at George Bush, Daddy Bush, he's the one that gave us Agenda 21. You look at George H.W. Bush, he gave us the NDAA. right? And open borders. So a lot of these Republicans aren't exactly what you think they are, and a lot of them are big advocates of big government. What we're urging people to do is to learn about this issue, read what they have to say, read the Convention of States material, but then get a hold of what we have to, our material here. And what we're doing here in the State House is we've been handing out this reprint, Levin's Risky Proposal, to legislators and anybody else that would like to take one. And we've been passing these out all over the country. They're also available on the New American website, thenewamerican.com, in PDF format. If you go to our website, jbs.org, you will see a drop-down, lots of information about this issue. And we've been fighting this at least since the mid-'80s, and very successfully. We've also been handing out 12-minute CDs of a video. This is something you put on your CD player. We've been asking them to say, hey, I know most people have time to sit down and watch a 12-minute video, but you can stick it on the car on the way home, and listen to it. This is some legislators from Oklahoma that several years ago successfully rescinded all of their calls for an Article 5 convention. And it's a little roundtable discussion. And we have a longer version of that, and it's also available on YouTube. It's called Beware of Con-Cons. And I want to clarify this. When we say a con-con, we're talking about an Article 5 convention. And folks from the Convention of the States will say, oh no, this is an amendments convention. That's true, but the bottom line is that amendments can radically change the Constitution. So the term Constitutional Convention, which has always been used, by the way, is a valid term. And again, there's still no guarantee that this convention will not change the rules. And one more thing too, they say 3/4 of the states will not do anything crazy. If you just read Article 5, there's also a provision that says that Congress can determine the mode of ratification. They can choose ratifying committees. And they did that at least one time with the 21st Amendment that repealed prohibition. They thought there were some dry states that were influence of the temperance union, and they thought, we probably won't get this passed, so we better have ratifying committees easier to control. So that can happen. There's no guarantee that it won't. So with that, I want to introduce my colleague, Dan McGonigle. He's an author, and he's a scholar on, not all of the Constitution, but some pertinent parts. And he's going to be discussing that. Dan?
Thank you, Hal. Hal Shurtleff's a great 21st century patriot here in the northeastern part of the country. I've had the pleasure of working with Hal on several projects in the past. And so, why not to call for a federal convention to amend the Constitution? Quoting a major point from previously mentioned article, Levin's Risky Proposal, a constitutional convention. New American Magazine article distributed to legislators today. Quote, the solution is to enforce the Constitution, not to change or ignore it. Another article, again by the New American Magazine, states should enforce, not revise the Constitution. And another article by the New American Magazine, repair versus restore. Why Constitution doesn't need Article 5 fix. There's another article by the New American Magazine, Dangers of a Constitutional Convention. And at the end, a major point at the end of this article says, the necessity is to safely restore good government and facilitate adherence to the Constitution. And I brought today an additional article that a few key leadership positions in the State House here will receive. A commentary from the 21st century's top constitutional scholar, Dr. Edwin Vieira Jr., titled, Enforcement Not Amendment is the Answer. couple of major points from Dr. Vieira's article here. The all-important question remains to be exactly how are new amendments to be enforced? Question mark. America needs a solution that can be put into operation right now, simply by the passage of a single statute in each state. So, until these relatively simple actions have been taken in at least one state, Dr. Vieira asks, why would any prudent person want to eschew them in favor of a highly problematic program aimed at a new constitutional convention? What is the root source of the solution that Dr. Vieira is asserting? Well, the original source is the fact that the end or purpose of civil government is, quote, the common defense of life, liberty, and property rights. I'll repeat that. The purpose of government is the common defense of life, liberty, and property. This is from such esteemed scholars as Thomas Hobbes, Leviathan, 1651, John Locke, Second Treatise on Civil Government, 1690, Samuel Adams, Boston Committee Correspondence Report, 1772, Frederick Bastiat, The Law, 1850. They all say the common or collective defense of life, liberty, and property is the purpose of government. The Constitution preamble in Article 1, Section 8 enumerate, provide for the common defense that I just mentioned. The Constitution, Article 6, enumerates that the Constitution shall be the supreme law of the land. The Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, enumerates that the people shall be organized in authorized state, county, local institutions, which are to be called forth to execute the laws and the common defense of those rights when necessary to secure freedom. Remember the title of Dr. Vieira's commentary, Enforcement, not Amendment, is the answer. Well, the enumerated execution of the laws is that enforcement. Remember that this Constitution shall be the supreme law. Therefore, the enumerated execution of the laws includes especially enforcement of the Constitution and Bill of Rights. My research has confirmed that it is the duty of we the people and state legislators to restore constitutional enforcement. The passage of a single statute in each state, again quoting Dr. Vieira, and the Constitution enumerates that it would be the statutorily restored state, county, local institutions composed of the people that have the duty and power to execute the laws and enforce the Constitution and Bill of Rights. To quote Dr. Vieira again, why would any prudent person want to eschew them in favor of a highly problematic program aimed at a new constitutional convention? Question mark. Finally, several 19th and 20th century scholars have confirmed that wholesale amending and changing of the Constitution and Bill of Rights cannot be restricted in convention. The only enumerated restriction and exception to the power to amend the Constitution is found right in Article 5 at the end, paraphrasing, that the number of U.S. senators per state must remain equal. Everything else in the Constitution could be up for change in a federal convention. So in today's political climate, I would, in the strongest possible terms, recommend not convening a convention to amend the Constitution. Thank you.
Yeah, before we close, I just want to mention this, the status in Vermont. There are several old calls in Vermont going back to the early 1900s. One of the calls is they wanted to have a constitutional amendment to outlaw bigamy and polygamy. As far as we know, there are no new calls. And although Vermont Single Payer is one of the groups that has been on record as supporting one, as far as we know, they have not submitted a resolution or any sponsored a resolution, had any state reps here sponsor a resolution. So our goal is to get the old calls rescinded, to sort of clean the books, and to stop any new calls. So I would recommend go to our website, jbs.org, and you'll find a lot of information about that. On Facebook, it's Choose Freedom, Stop the Con, or there's a few good Facebook pages. One of them is Defend, Not Amend, and Stop the Constitutional Convention. So those are 3 Facebook pages with lots of up-to-date information on the status of the states. So thank you very much.
Thank you.